good morning and welcome to our all staff and student meeting for the election of the next chair of our Board of Governors. My name is Anna Duthie, I'm the University's Communications Manager and I will attempt to MC this meeting. So, as you're all aware, the voting for the next chair of the Board of Governors has taken place across campus all week, and this morning is your opportunity to hear from our three candidates, Neil Bruce, Lynn Clow and Colin Hunter, who will all share a few words and then answer any of your questions. So I'll shortly be asking the candidates to take to the stage before opening the floor up to any questions, but before I do, I would like to introduce you to Veronica Strachan, our returning officer, who will say a few words.
Thanks, Anna. I think just to give a little bit of background to how we've got to where we are today. A few years ago, the Higher Education Governance Scotland Act was passed, and I'm sure everybody's really delighted to hear there's some legal lesson going to be this morning. And that Act required us to now elect the chair of the Board of Governors. So in accordance with that Act, you might remember we had consultation with staff about the process that we were using. We sent the draft of the election rules and everything around all staff. We got comments back, we made some amendments, and then we went out to advert. After competitive interviewing, the appointment subcommittee determined which candidates met the requirements, and they set quite a high bar. And I'm delighted that today we have now three very eligible candidates for the chair of board. You'll have the opportunity to read a little bit about them on our website. I know a lot of people have voted. I keep encouraging everybody to keep voting. Tell your friends to vote. This is a really important decision for us, and in order to ensure that people are best informed, we're going to get the candidates to say a little bit more about them, but probably most importantly answer some of your questions. We're not filming today, so nobody needs to worry about being recorded and filmed. We will look at putting some audio onto the web so that for the rest of the afternoon, people that weren't here could hear a little bit about what happened. But we're not filming, so please don't be shy to answer or ask any questions. Anna, I'll let you take over from now.
Thank you. So we're going to do it in alphabetical order. So can I first of all ask Neil to take to the stage?
Thank you very much. Well, my name is Neil Bruce. I actually think all the candidates here are probably in this process for exactly the same thing. So therefore, I'm not really going to go back into that too much. But just from my perspective, I'm from the area. I mean, I originally was brought up, went to Portlethen Primary School, then Stonehaven Academy. Was in the industry locally, and then embarked on a more sort of international, global career in business. I think in terms of what motivated me to apply for this, it was really around my commitment to lifelong learning, and it was based on my own experience, because I came into industry sort of fairly young. I got on a graduate scheme, and then I went back a few times in terms of my own education. So in terms of doing my chartership down in Newcastle as a marine architect. And then later on, in terms of progression within the business, I went and did an MBA again. I went back to Newcastle to do that. But also, after that, I came back to Aberdeen for a little while, and that's really where the links with RGU sort of started in terms of business. And it was really looking at areas where we could help. Initially, the MBA students, then it was around the entrepreneur, dinners and events that the business did. And then got involved in a few of the Scottish initiatives in terms of the Determined to Succeed programme, which was really for younger children. But therefore, from a motivation perspective, it's about lifelong learning. It's about trying to put something back in, and it's about trying to help the university and ultimately all of the stakeholders. whether it's the management, the staff, the students, or the local community in some shape or form, really trying to put something back in and help all stakeholders in the operation of the university. So from that perspective, I think, what do I bring to that? Apart from that commitment, I certainly bring international experience. So the last two companies that I worked for, one was a UK company, AMEC, had a local presence here. 35,000 people in 30 countries. Ultimately at the end, I was on the board of AMEC. And then I joined a North American company based in Canada. And we had 52,000 people in 50 countries. And the relevance of all of that really is around some of the, I guess, the governance piece of the governor's or the chair's role. So I do think I've got up-to-date and a very global outlook in terms of what good practice is in terms of governance, risk management, and other aspects of formulating strategies and making sure that you actually deliver on it. And ultimately, I think, delivering on a strategy is really, really important for all the stakeholders. It's not just something that you come up with a blue sky thinking and, a lot of wonderful things and then find it really difficult to deliver on it. So again, I think what the board needs is a variety of skills, and I've looked at the governors on the board, and I think the governors on the board have got a whole variety of skills that bring all sorts of good things to the board and ultimately to the management and the running of the university. So from that perspective, I think back to what I said originally, I think we've got three great candidates that will all be really, really successful in terms of taking that forward. But I just wanted to spend a few minutes just basically outlining the things that I think I can bring. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Neil. I will now hand over to Lynn.
I was just commenting that it gets my vote. That sounds quite... So, why am I here? How do I follow that? I suppose currently in a job, I'm the SVP for HR for KC Deutag, and you'll either know the name because you know oil and gas and you know about us, or because of the DART facility that's here. In my role, I'm clearly passionate about developing young people and also children, and I know there's not many children in the room. When I look at myself on the profile against these two guys, I'm thinking, well, why her? What is it about her? I've got experience of many industries and many different careers. I started life training to be a chartered accountant, believe it or not, and did that in the financial sector. Then decided, you know what, that wasn't for me. Went into an HR role, did postgraduate qualifications, got professional certification, and then thought, quite fancy running a business. So moved into manufacturing and construction and ran some project management and construction teams. And then thought, I really like HR. I want to work with people, but I've got a whole host of skills now that I can use, and I can really understand the business and I can relate to the business rather than just sort of sitting there talking about theory. And I think that's some of what professional qualifications in education brings, is that it teaches you how to work in the real world. And that's some of the reason I'm quite passionate about this role at RGU, because as you look at other universities, there's lots of universities doing great things, but every university has its place, whether it's Oxford and Cambridge, and everyone who wants to work in the City of London wants that on their CV, but it doesn't suit everyone. What suits everyone is that you get the qualifications you need to get you a job that you enjoy and you're passionate about. And I think that's what I bring to the role of the chair, a slightly different view, experience of governance, but maybe not as much as this man, but a real passion for it. I I sit on the children's panel. I'm a trustee of a UK-wide charity, as well as having a full-time job and being a full-time mum to rugby-playing boys. And what drives me to want to do these things is just a real passion and a seeing how things can work for real in the business sector. And we do that in my current role, to actually get young people and children to change the world. It sounds like a grand statement. When I was thinking about what I was going to say, this feels like the Miss World answer, so I'm not expecting a crown at any point. But it's true. You know, we look at the big challenges for me from what's going on at the moment with the coronavirus, to what's happening with the planet, right down to actually making a difference to children's lives in Aberdeen. So it's the big stuff to the small stuff that really inspires me to do this. And that's why I'm here. And what difference can I make to RGU? A bit like Neil said, there's a really strong board of governors, there's a fantastic student population and a brilliant academic team, and I'm not sure that I bring anything to that, but what I bring is a passion for RGU and where it sits in the university world, and what it can deliver to industry. So that's a bit about me.
Thank you, Lynn. And last but by no means least, can I introduce you to Colin?
Well, thank you very much. And first of all, can I thank you all for coming? Because I'm sure you're all very busy, but it's great. And I know Veronica was very worried that we'd be here and we'd be speaking to fewer people we had on the platform. So thank you so much for coming along to listen to, because it is an important position. I'm Colin Hunter. I'm a recently retired general practitioner. I was a GP in West Hill for 33 years. But I wasn't just a GP. I've done lots of other things, but I was always anchored in the practice, and that was very much part of my passion, was looking after for patients. And I want to just touch on three things which I think will give you a sense of about what I'm about. I'm going to talk a little bit about values, I'm going to talk a little bit about education, and I'm finally going to talk about people. And if I can talk first of all about values, when I joined the practice, we were having the usual sort of group norming storming thing, and we decided that it would be useful to draw up a set of values that we could all adhere to, and we came up with 4. And these 4 values stood us in good stead for the whole 30-odd years I was in the practice, and I hope will continue to stand them in good stead. And there were these. They were about equity and fairness. They were about providing the best quality patient care that we possibly could. They were about looking after ourselves and looking after our staff. And they were about having fun. And these were the 4 values that we've done. And I've kind of used those values in lots of the roles that I've undertaken in my lifetime, and I've always found them very helpful. On the education front, of course, and we've mentioned already lifelong learning. Lifelong learning is an absolute and happens to all of us from the moment we're born, virtually to the moment that we die. In fact, people are still learning as they die because they learn lots of things about themselves in that particular moment in time. So I've been a lifelong learner and I'm still learning, but I've also been involved in various aspects of teaching myself, both as undergraduate students, as a postgraduate trainer, in educational management and in strategy development for education for general practice across the whole of the UK. So I've done quite a bit around education, and like the others here, I'm passionate about education and making sure that we do the best for all of our students and our school children, and indeed CPD for all, particularly those who need to continue to develop to deliver service for the public. And finally, people, and I think we've already touched on the 3 major groups, I think, that impinge in the university. But the university is all about people. It is really all about people. We can get ourselves very excited about buildings and grounds and how the investments are doing. Brackets not very good today, but these things are important. But the most important thing for the university by far is people. And we've got, as already mentioned, 3 groups. We have the staff grouping, And there's a lot to be done around support and development of staff. There's the student grouping, and there's much to do about improving and keeping our high level of student experience up. And finally, there are the stakeholder groups. So I joined the Board of Governors just over a year ago, and part of the reason I put my hat in the ring was I really loved doing it. As indicated, the board is a super group of people, very diverse, but really very committed to ensuring the future of this university, and that has been great. I've had great interactions with the staff. Several of us were at Gray's yesterday afternoon for a 2-hour session about the work that's going on up there, and to be honest, I came away with a real spring in my step because there was such a lot of positivity around what people were doing and why they were doing it, why they were trying to make things better for the students. So that was fantastic. I've met students as well, of course. I always find that I get the most honest response when I get them off-piste. So I was in a restaurant last week, and a girl from Gray's School of Art was serving, and I said, "Are you a student?" She said, "Yes, I'm from Robert Gordon's University." And I said, "Oh, how's the course?" Blah, 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 blah. And eventually I admitted to the fact that I was on the Board of Governors, so she just about fell over at that point. Her main issue, by the way, was with how poor coloured the gowns were for graduation, which was just rapidly approaching, and I said I'd look into that for her. And the one thing I've missed, I've chaired the board of an educational institution up until last year, and I've missed doing the chairmanship bit. I've certainly enjoyed doing the board bit, so I would very much look forward to taking the board forward with the staff and with the students. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Colin. So I think you'll all agree that was 3 really inspiring and engaging speeches, and I'm sure it's going to be a difficult decision for everybody. And well done, you all kept your allotted time frame, so well done on that count. So now, really, it's over to you. I'll open the floor up to any questions. If you do have any questions, if you could raise your hand and wait till, where is she with the roaming mic? Oh, sorry. Veronica with the roaming mic will come over to you, and you can ask your question so that we can all hear. Well, I'll start then. I've got a question for the 3 of you, really. Oh, sorry, I didn't see you over there.
Hi. Thank you very much for volunteering or putting yourselves forward to be the governors for the university. I'm just wondering what you think the main challenges are for Robert Gordon University at this particular moment in time.
Is that question to either candidate?
To all.
All of them. Start.
Okay. I think there's quite a lot of challenges. I mean, there's. Sorry.
Is that?
Hello.
Do you want to try that?
This one's better. I think there's a lot of challenges. I mean, there's challenges not just unique to RGU. I mean, but to all universities and all businesses and community at large. But not being involved in the board to date, I've been looking at, in terms of doing due diligence. I mean, I've been looking at sort of public information that you can look at, and also with being in North America for 4 years and coming back. I mean, the one thing that I certainly could do is reflect on where I thought the university was 4 or 5 years ago and where it is today, and it sort of strikes me that the university's success was heavily linked, I think, to the oil and gas industry. Not exclusively, but it was linked to the oil and gas industry in terms of its support and quite often with funding. And it looks like that's not quite as good as it used to be, sort of naturally in terms of following the industry trends. So from that perspective, I think the challenge is around, how can you reset a few key things probably around overseas students and not being reliant just on oil and gas, but on energy in its widest form or lots of other industries, and also looking at is it possible to sort of improve and develop and expand the research and development piece in that. So from that perspective, I'd certainly be looking at the ongoing medium to long-term strategy in terms of how we actually going to deliver a sustainable future for the university into the longer term.
For me, to add to what Neil said, there are clearly financial challenges that every university has in different ways of when you do your research. I'm also not on the board at the moment, but when you do your research and you look at what other universities are doing, how do we learn from that? There's definitely the challenge around looking away from oil and gas, looking at this great buzzwords around energy transition and how does RGU become a leader in that, as well as finding other industries so that when energy transition, hopefully a long way in the future, is not the coolest thing, then actually what the university provides is robust and sustainable. I think there is the big challenge of the university that's just up the road, and actually Aberdeen coming what appears to be from the outside more into some of the territory that was traditionally RGU around employability of students and things like that. So they all kind of come together, looking at it very much from the outside as being some of the big challenges. Almost adding to what Neil says, I'm not quite sure how you're going to add as we go along to what we're saying, but they would be the big challenges from my perspective.
Well, thank you. Obviously the financial issue is quite important, but there are other important issues. But just to say on the financial side, the importance, it's quite a simple equation. We need to ensure there's sufficient income and that we don't spend too much and that the books balance, and we're not quite there at the moment. And therefore, the sensible thing that charities do when they're in that sort of position, they look to diversify income as much as they possibly can. But for universities, there's a particular issue, and the particular one is quite acute. It's the effect of Brexit and our still complete lack of understanding and knowledge as to what effect that will have, particularly in recruitment of European graduates, and the effect that will have on the university. So that's an acute thing. The other thing that's difficult in terms of the just general funding is that basic funding from Scottish Government has been flat for quite a long time, while the expenses, staff expenses, student expenses, utilities, all of that is increasing. And that is only sustainable for so long. And one of the roles I think that we in the governors and the chairs of the boards of governors in Scotland need to do is that we need to begin to gently challenge that. There is, I think, an apathy in Scotland generally. As you know, my background's health, and I think there is an apathy generally in our population around, at the moment, challenging government around some of the big issues. How often is higher education up there in the politicians' agenda out there? I think it's hardly ever there. John Swinney will speak about schools, they'll speak about the health service, but rarely, if at all, is higher education up there. And I think we need to work together with universities. John and I were speaking earlier. One of the difficulties is that there are different groups of universities. So there's the old and ancients and very well established, pretty well off, got lots of resource. And then there's a middle group, of which I think we're one, and then there's an even more struggling group at the bottom. So I think we need to do that. Now, I wouldn't do that in a very overt, challenging way. I don't think that ever actually produces the best results. But we need to work behind the scenes together to try and influence government.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Yep, just got one down at the front.
Hi. Colin mentioned staff development in your talk earlier, and I wondered if you have if the panel have some views on priorities for staff development, given the challenges that you've outlined facing higher education and Robert Gordon University.
Thank you, Julie.
Well, the educational principle should be that development is based on the individual's need and their direction of travel. So, I mean, I hope that our appraisal system and our performance management system allows that identification of need. Where most institutions, both in the private and public sector, and certainly in the charitable sector, I have a role in a big national charity, which is a care charity. And when I joined them 3 years ago, they had virtually no staff development programme, and they now have, they're spending about £2 million now on it. But, so there's a series of steps, but we need to then ensure that we provide the development support for that. Now, of course, we're in a really good position to do that. We've got the business school, we've got lots of expertise in the university, so it's about harnessing that and ensuring that it's available. And my own little personal bee in my bonnet is that in every other organisation that I've been involved with, that particularly educational institutions, do not believe that leadership is a given and is a natural sort of in there thing. Leadership is something actually that you can very much develop within individuals and within the institution. So I would certainly hope that we had a good leadership programme for our academic staff.
Okay. I'm going to try and get the mic closer. I think I can't speak specifically about RGU because I'm not involved, but for me it's we can't have people educating other people who are not being educated themselves and developed. It has to be a key principle. I agree completely with Colin that it also has to be individual, because everyone's what they need, whether it be in terms of professional skills or behaviours, leadership and working with people, dealing with conflict, all of the softer skills that are sometimes forgotten. There needs to be a balance between the two. So, like I say, I can't comment specifically on what happens at RGU around appraisals and things, but it has to be a top priority. I don't think we could ask all of you guys to be educating our students, and I'm clearly quite boring because you're sitting with your arms folded at the back, educating the students to not be educated yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hugely important, and you know, everybody would have heard the cliche around, you know, people are ultimately the organisation's assets, or best assets. Therefore, you would want to maintain and develop. And apart from the cliche, which is sort of, you know, run its course, I think the fundamental is absolutely true. However, what I've also found within business too is quite often organisations, whether it's universities or private companies or a whole variety, quite often they're not actually very good at implementing their core business. You know, so what I found before with, you know, the last two companies that I work with is when we have internal programs that require project management, quite often they're not as well done or as well managed or have the same outcomes as we do for an external customer. Because I think we become quite sort of blasé a little bit and a little bit take it for granted. And I think it's really important to have the governance around making sure that the things that are really important in order to deliver what the university is here for is constantly sort of challenged and checked, just to make sure that all of these things are actually in place.
Thank you very much. Phil.
Thank you. My question is really about the role of chair of the Board of Governors. We're trying to develop a new teaching and learning framework, or it's been developed. We're moving more towards whole person education. You've talked a lot about values and key skills that our graduates develop. We're very, very interested in well-being. We're very interested in healthy universities and the development around that. What do you think the role of chair, and you talked about financial sustainability, all three of you, the role of chair, how can you influence the university in terms of perhaps reallocation of resources or the battle for resources within the university? What do you see your role in that? Because we haven't been in this area, it's very complicated, and if we're going to go to this whole person education, there might be some battles within the university around resource. How do you see your role in that area?
Lynn, I'll start with you first this time.
That was a pretty hard question. No, it's okay. I think it's a challenge, not just universities, but everyone has, about how do you take the limited resources you've got and use it in the right place. I think the role of the chair is actually to first listen and not just hear the conversation or the person or the plan that's right in front of them, but actually to listen to all the voices, the principal, others on the board, the staff, the students. Listening only goes so far, though, because you get to a point where you listen to everybody, you can't take a decision, or you can't guide a decision, and there is a difference between, and we were actually just talking about this, the difference between the role of the principals and the management team and the board. And I think the chair's role is to help to listen and guide, nudge, ask great questions, insightful questions, to make sure that the university as a whole gets to the right answer. But the reality is it's not ever going to please everybody. But that listening is the first key part for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one, I don't want to go over the same things because I think all of the comments are very valid, but I think the other piece is, you know, whether it's the chair or the governors, I think there needs to be a recognition between the differences between the roles of executive and non-executive, and you know, and the governors are non-executive per se in terms of their role. So from that perspective, you know, what I talked about earlier in terms of making sure that there is a coherent strategy, and not just a long-term strategy, but a short to medium-term strategy with key deliverables and a pathway to get to what is agreed. Now, ultimately, that's an executive responsibility to formulate and to present that. The non-exec and the governor's responsibility is to challenge that, ask the questions, give insight and learning from what experiences from either other industries or other walks of life, and to ultimately form that. And I think the chair's role is very much around listening and making sure that there's full engagement in all of that. But you also need to get to a point where you're making decisions, because I think the worst thing for any organisation is where you have fantastic engagement and no decision making. So I think there's a formulated way that can be quite effective.
Yes, so I would agree with all of that. I mean, I think it is very important that people do understand that the chair of the Board of Governors is indeed that. They are the chair of the Board of Governors, and it's the board that actually is the sovereign body within the university. There are some extra bits that the chair does. For example, works very closely and supports the principal and the executive much more than even I do as the vice chair. So that's a very clear thing. But I think all of us would recognise the importance of getting the strategy right and then ensuring that the resource follows the strategy. Now that sounds dead easy, but of course you have to rob Peter often to pay Paul, particularly in a time of financial constraint. As I've said earlier, the university is in a time of financial constraint, so it's fine if there's plenty of money because you can actually fund the forward-going bit while you're still funding the baseline bit. So it's about being clever. The sort of thing that the board does and will be doing is ensuring that, for example, the strategy is owned across the university so that it shouldn't be cooked up in a room by the executive team. The board nodded off, and we hope that it all happens. One of the key things meetings is to ensure that the staff are engaged with the strategy and understand what's going on. They also need to understand the resource constraints. So there's a big communication piece that I think we could get better between the board and the staff. But these are very difficult decisions. I was heartened last night because when you see and hear stuff that relates to the strategy document actually playing out in the workplace and in the university with the students and with the staff, and you think, chime, that fits with that particular strategic objective. But, it sounds, when you see it like that, it seems very boring. For me, it gets very exciting when you actually see it being played out. So I think you have to be pretty neutral as a chair, actually. If you begin to have your own agenda, it begins to actually devalue your position, and it reduces trust. The chair needs to be completely trusted by everybody in the university, and therefore they need to be a fairly even-handed sort of person, and that can be difficult if you've got strong views. I often found it harder to chair than actually be a board member, because as a board member I could say what the hell I thought. Often as a chair you're listening and thinking, that's not really what I want the answer to be, but in fact you have to take it at that sort of level. So I think less focus on the chair being able to make things happen. It's the board that approves things happening, but actually making sure that the processes and the engagement, particularly with staff and students, is good.
Any other questions? Oh, we've just got one down in the front here.
Hi. This is to all of you, if I get the distance right here. Communication was just mentioned. How do you see yourself and the board communicating with staff and students? Because you have a very, very important role within the university, but when I speak to colleagues, there seems a bit of a disconnect. So, I'm rooting for you as an entity, but how are you going to communicate with staff and students?
Thank you. I'll start with you again first.
Okay, just sort of building on something that's been said on the previous question, I think I think communication is really, really important in terms of making sure that, whether it's through blogs, social media or whatever, that communication is really important to make sure that people understand what's going on and the progress and the priorities. But at the same time, I think from a board perspective, going back to what I said earlier around the roles of the non-execs and the execs, I think it's important that the board ensures that the execs actually communicate consistently, effectively, and regularly. And I think there's a board role in making sure that that's actually done, and that there's a way of making sure that there is regular feedback in order to make sure that the feedback's there. We can learn from that and look to sort of take it on from there.
I agree with what Neil said. For me, it would probably start as an individual in the role from day one. I'm not involved with the university at the moment in terms of a board type role, so I would want to spend time meeting staff, students, sitting in lectures. It might take me back 20 years, but actually start to really kind of understand what I would say is the heart, maybe more than 20 years actually, understand the heartbeat for me, because I think there is a bit that I totally agree with Neil, encouraging the leadership team to communicate and people to communicate more, but for me there's a bit about setting an example and actually trying to do that on a regular basis. There's no point in sitting on the board and directing things based on paper without spending a lot of time with people, and I think I'm a bit of a people person, so I would want to do that from day one.
The first thing to say is it's really difficult to get it right. So again, I've visited lots of organisations, and often you see communication, particularly communication from the top down and from the bottom up, to be an issue. And if I take Leonard Cheshire, where I've been supporting a programme of cultural change, the one indicator that hasn't moved far enough, as far as I'm concerned, is the staff feel that the executive communicate well with the staff. And that's despite me knowing that the executive are working really hard at it. So I think as I mentioned, I think it's something we could do better. Again, it's quite difficult. I mean, the Board of Governors really should be very sort of quietly in the background ensuring that the work of the university is happening and supporting the executive to do it, scrutinising, doing all that. In a sense, and there has been some recent experience of this at RGU, I mean, the board only gets into the real public eye when there are significant difficulties. So to be honest, as the Chair of Board of Governors, I'm pretty happy, certainly in the public eye, if my name isn't in the paper, and I should be seen to be supporting the executive role. But the one thing that, and I think it's really what Lynn's saying, there's something about just walking the floor. Now, it's a big floor in the university, so when I was chair of the Board of Trustees at the Royal College of GPs, 360 staff, I hope that if you asked most of them who I was, they would have said, because when I was in the building, I went and chatted to people. But this is a much bigger campus and much bigger organisation. And in Leonard Cheshire, where we've got 6,000 staff, 130 institutions, it is really difficult. And despite newsletters and podcasts and all the stuff that they do, the indicator's still low. So I think whatever any of us doing, we should be able to do it. But I would hope that staff would feel free to both contact the Chair of Board of Governors and the staff governors, and the students would feel free to contact the student governors. We are rich in terms of the number of governors we have that are both on the staff side and the student side, and they are very capable people, let me say that. They're very good. So we should be using our team of governors effectively.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other questions? Yep, just got one down here at the front as well.
Hi, thank you. I was thinking that it's obviously a period of significant change for the university. We've got a new chair of the Board of Governors, but also in the not too distant future, a new principal. And of course, we'll all be really sad to see John go. But I wondered if you could say something about how you'll support the institution through this period of change.
Thank you. Colin, I'll start with you first.
Well, thank you. I hope... I've been on the appointments committee, so I was slightly more in an inside point from my two colleagues here, but I hope that people feel that they've been consulted. I can tell you that when we started out in the process, we were very keen that we got views of staff and students, and there was an opportunity for you to comment on the sort of individual that we wanted as the new principal. I can tell you, for me, it was a humongous relief that actually the scoring around the sort of criteria for that person's spec from the board was almost identical to that from the stuff that came in from the staff and from the students. And for me, that felt really good. And actually, it says something about the culture of the university and also some of the work that John's done the last 18 months. So that is very good. The chair of the board works very closely with the principal or with the chief exec in another organisation. That's just how it works. It has to be a partnership. You have to meet regularly. You troubleshoot some of the issues. You decide what has to come to the board. And clearly, the new principal will be coming in, and we will be looking all to support him or her when they arrive. So it is a very that relationship between the chair and the principal is a very crucial one, and you have to make sure it works. And I do hope, we're in the final stages, I do hope we get a great principal. I'm very encouraged by those who are in the last lap of the process, and I'm confident that we'll get some very great principal to follow John's excellent work.
For me, the first bit is recognising it is a huge change. But actually there's a real benefit, sorry John, in a chair and a new principal, because there's a real kind of eyes opening, looking, seeing the opportunity. The key bit though with change is not changing everything and moving on sensibly. It's really easy. I can speak from experience, have a new chief executive at Casey Doitag, and sometimes people come in and say, right, we're going to change everything, and not actually take the really, really good things with you, which will be 99%, but actually taking the things that don't work and trying to work between the chair and the new principal to improve those things, but not changing the world. But recognising it for me is the first bit.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really comment on the process that's ongoing at the moment, but I do know, again, from experience of being a chief exec for the past, sort of 10 years, that the relationship between the chair and the CEO is really, really important. And that's lifelong learning for me because, I've had a couple of really good supportive ones, and I've had a couple that have been chairs, that have maybe not been quite as supportive, and I think that's where, and I think everybody's talked about it. I think that's where this piece around understanding the roles between sort of principal and chair, the roles of who does what, and not really crossing that line across into the other sort of territory, because I think it's quite tempting for chairs at times to actually voice opinions or to actually look to try and get involved in the day-to-day business, and that's really not the role, and unless from a governance perspective there's something wrong. So apart from the governance aspects and sort of challenging what is being done, I think that you've got to be really, really respectful of the two roles and make sure that working relationship is for the benefit of the university and all the stakeholders.
Rita.
Shouting at students, that's what it is. I've got a question around the public sector and the university as a concept. I mean, I've worked in universities all my life, as has John and many others here, and it's about your role as chair in a context where you're responsible for an entity that, okay, we've only been 30 odd years a university, but can be centuries, and where you are dispersing public funds, etc. How important do you think the chair's role is in managing that appropriately?
Thank you. Lynn, I'm going to start with you first.
Yep. I think the short answer is very important. Is that working? Is it? Yes, that's it. Sorry. Very important. I mean, it's like funds in any organisation. No organisation survives without funding. So you have to think very carefully. It's back to some of the questions that were asked here. How do you guide the allocation of those funds? But when it's public funding, it is open to much more scrutiny, and you need to be much more transparent in your decision making and your guidance. You need to be very open, I think, when you don't, especially as a new chair who's not worked in universities before, if that's what happened. Be very honest in your questioning, but be educated in how you do things. So I think there's a bit really around transparency and honesty, and then being able to, back to the point about making decisions, justify the decisions that you take. Because sometimes in the private sector, it's easy to just say, look, this is just what I've decided. Based on this, this and this, whereas actually really going into in detail in your thinking, which you often do, but actually being able to articulate it to other people, I think is the difference for me with any public expenditure.
So the simple answer is absolutely crucial. It's fundamentally part of the role, but not just of the chair, actually, of the whole board. I mean, we are legally responsible for the institution. So I agree absolutely with what Lynn's saying. When I was chair of the Board of Trustees of the Royal College of GPs, which is, it's a national institution, it's a charity, I had what I called, it was in England, I called it the Daily Mail test. I suppose we'd call it the Daily Record test here, which was on my shoulder, I had a reporter from the Daily Mail, and the question was, how would I be able to justify what we're about to decide to that reporter of the Daily Mail? And I found that a very, very good test of just ensuring that we were doing the right thing and that we could justify what we're doing. It used to drive people mad, but when we went out for dinner, for example, we didn't have alcohol because in case there would be a reporter from somewhere, there's a lot of medical press, tabloid medical press, and to be caught as the chair of the Board of Trustees of the Royal College of GPs, no doubt saying that I'd spent so much money on fancy wine was not going to be the right thing. So I've always found the Daily Mail test actually a very good, I should have written it up actually in an academic journal somewhere, but there we go.
Yeah, I think the most important thing in leadership is integrity. And I think if you act and adhere and this sort of values-based piece and live by your integrity, then ultimately all these other things will be in place. I think this is maybe, the world's changing, and there's perceptions, I think, about public, private, and the differences, and I don't think the differences are quite as large as people would actually tend to think, because from a company perspective, I mean, there's a huge amount of scrutiny now from shareholders who are determining a whole range of things from around carbon footprints, around ESG, around sustainability, and ultimately saying, I'm not going to invest in that company unless I see a value-driven organisation, openness and transparency in the way that you communicate, and that you are actually living up to the standards and the commitments that you've made. So, from that perspective, I'm not sure there's a massive difference. I think it's just really important that you live by your own integrity in terms of all of this.
Thank you very much. I'm conscious of time. I think we're at about 11 o'clock. So unless there's any other burning questions, I think we'll conclude today's meeting. Thank you all very much to the candidates for coming along today, and thank you all very much for your questions.
Just as everybody's getting ready to leave, if you haven't already voted, please remember to vote. Encourage your colleagues to vote. You've got an email, it's from CES, take part, find it and vote. The process for recruiting principal was mentioned. Just to say that winds up at the end of next week. Some of the people in this group here are on focus groups that will be